is a growing history that continues to make the sport of racing great, and where it grows from starts with understanding where it began, seeing and hearing the stories that bring us back day after day.
Okay, hey, we're going to start right at the beginning of NASCAR. We'll do a little bit of history today, and moonshining did have a huge impact on NASCAR when NASCAR began racing. In the early days, even in the late 30s, moonshiners were actually building a few of their own little dirt tracks, and their drivers were so good at evading the sheriffs and the feds that they got to be really good drivers. So the moonshiners would show up with their cars and drivers at a little dirt track, usually about a quarter mile in length, and they'd make bets. And after a little while, people started hearing the cars, and they'd show up and watch the races, and they would actually pass the hat. So the drivers would make a couple bucks on the side too. And what the moonshiners did to the cars was really quite amazing. They would soup up an old flathead Ford engine like this, and they'd run some methanol in there, special fuels, and they'd build heads, special heads for the high compression flathead engine. And they were really the first hot rodders, the moonshine people, because those cars had to be fast enough to outlast the sheriffs who were chasing them. When Bill France began NASCAR in 1948, he heavily relied on the moonshine trade to attract cars and drivers. Many of the first NASCAR stars actually ran moonshine. And the first championship won in NASCAR was by a driver named Red Byron, and his owner was a very famous moonshiner. And Red Byron drove his cars and won the very first championship for NASCAR in '48. And in '49, his moonshine kingpin, they were called, the owners, he bought Red Byron a beautiful brand new Cadillac. So they made a stock car out of it. And they raced part of the year and won the 1949 championship. So Red Byron was responsible for the first two NASCAR championships. Ray Parks was his moonshiner kingpin and car owner. Now some of the things they did to these cars to evade the feds and the sheriffs, just hard to believe what they did. But they used to have tanks of oil that they would actually open up when they were being chased, and they'd spread oil out from the car. And they also had an oil tank that would put oil on the exhaust pipes, so the exhaust pipes would smoke, and the sheriffs couldn't quite see well. So this one time in Georgia, a sheriff got a great idea. He was going to build a big hook on the front of his car, a big clamp, and if he got close enough to the moonshiners, he could clamp onto the rear bumper, hit the brakes, and they'd catch the moonshiners. Well, the moonshiners, they lost a couple cars like that, and they got caught with moonshine, so they decided to take all the bolts out of the rear bumpers, and they replaced that with, and it was the wire clothes hangers they used to attach the rear bumpers, and it worked very well. They got caught a couple times, and the sheriffs would clamp up the back bumper, and the rear bumper would just get torn right off. And the only part of the car that the sheriff had was the rear bumper. Moonshiners would take off. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Moonshiners would also keep boxes of roofing nails, and they just throw them out. They just throw them out, and you know, most of them are going to end up like this, and sheriffs would get flat tires. So the moonshiners were really innovators.
visit the dynamic North Carolina Auto Racing Hall of Fame to see this and other cars that have helped mark history in person. Preserving racing history.